March 2nd, 1944. The morning over northern France begins as a faint silver haze. Frost lies across the hedgerows. Somewhere far above, a slow thunder builds, the sound of hundreds of engines pushing east. To men on the ground, it's only a distant growl. To Major Egon Mayer, it is the sound of duty. He sits strapped inside his Focke-Wulf 190A6, high over the countryside near Montmedy. Below him lies a river of vapor trail bombers, B-17s and B-24s crawling toward Germany. He has fought this scene 100 times. For years, Mayer and his men of Jagdgeschwader to Richthofen have met the Americans here on the edge of occupied Europe. He knows their formations, their weaknesses, their arrogance. He knows the thunderbolts that protect them, heavy, sluggish machines that run out of breath long before his own. He looks once toward the sun. The sky seems clear. He leads his flight downward in a shallow dive. What he cannot see are the new fighters flying even higher, waiting for the first attack. They are slender, silver, long-winged. The Americans call them Mustangs. Within minutes, the old balance of the Channel front will vanish, and the man who once mocked the new enemy fighter will vanish with it. Egon Mayer was born in August 1917 in the lakeside town of Constance. He grew up in a country rebuilding itself from defeat, a Germany obsessed with the promise of flight. When the Luftwaffe was born in 1935, Mayer joined as one of its young cadets. He trained on gliders, biplanes, then the new monoplane fighters that promised speed beyond imagination. By 1940, he flew over France in a Messerschmitt Bf 109, chasing the remnants of the French Air Force and RAF patrols during the Battle of France. He was disciplined, quiet, analytical. Fellow pilots said he rarely celebrated victories. He logged them, studied them, and moved on. The early years of the war favored men like him. The Luftwaffe was efficient, organized, filled with combat experience. Over the Channel, Mayer learned to duel with Spitfires. Over the Atlantic coast, he learned patience. When he joined Jagdgeschwader to Richthofen, he entered a legendary lineage, a unit tracing back to Manfred von Richthofen himself, the Red Baron. The red lightning bolt painted on its fuselages symbolized both heritage and pride. In 1941 and 42, the Channel front became his classroom. The RAF mounted daily sweeps, circus missions meant to lure German fighters up and bleed them. Mayer learned to ambush from altitude, to strike and disappear. His score climbed slowly at first, then steadily. By late 1942, he was Staffelkapitän, a squadron leader. He had already shot down more than 20 Spitfires and Hurricanes. He was not flamboyant like some. He was precise. Every kill confirmed his belief in the superiority of German training and German aircraft. But across the ocean, another storm gathered. The United States had entered the war. Its industrial potential was immense, its airmen still inexperienced but determined. In 1943, the American 8th Air Force began daylight strategic bombing of occupied Europe. They came in waves, box formations of B-17s that seemed to fill the sky. At first, the bombers lacked long-range protection. P-47 Thunderbolts escorted them only partway. Then the bombers continued alone into the heart of Europe, where men like Egon Mayer waited. He studied the box formations and saw opportunity. The B-17s bristled with guns, yet they were most vulnerable when approached head-on, where defensive fire converged poorly. Mayer and his comrade George Peter Eder perfected a new tactic, the frontal angriff, the head-on attack. It demanded precision and nerve. Close from 12 o'clock, guns blazing at closing speeds above 900 kilometers per hour, then breakaway seconds before collision. Executed properly, it shattered bomber formations. In late 1942 and early 1943, Mayer's group claimed dozens of heavy bombers destroyed using this method. The tactic spread through the Luftwaffe. Mayer's calm voice in briefings, his meticulous diagrams, turned chaos into doctrine. For this, he received the Knight's Cross in August 1943. By the end of 1943, Mayer was one of Germany's most respected aces. 90 victories. Promotions came quickly. In July, he took command of JG-2 as Commodore. His men admired him, a leader who flew first and returned last. Yet cracks were forming in the sky he ruled. The Americans were learning fast. New escort tactics extended the reach of P-47s, and rumors spread of a new plane, lighter, faster, able to fly farther than any fighter before it. Some reports called it Mustang. Mayer read these briefings with skepticism. He dismissed them as propaganda. How could a single-engine Allied fighter accompany bombers all the way to Germany and back? To him, it was impossible. German pilots had faced P-40s and Spitfires. Both lacked endurance. The Luftwaffe still held home advantage, radar control, fuel, training. But beneath that confidence, the Reich's strength was eroding. The Battle of Kursk had drained resources. Allied bombing struck deep into industrial centers. Fuel shortages grew. Even experienced units like JG-2 felt the pinch. Fewer spare parts, fewer replacements, more raw recruits replacing lost veterans. Still, Mayer pressed on. January 1944 brought near-daily raids by the 8th Air Force. On February 4th, he downed a P-47. The next day, he claimed 2 more bombers, raising his total to 100. He became the first fighter leader on the Western Front to reach that mark. Newspapers in Germany hailed him as a symbol of defiance. His photograph appeared in Signal magazine. A composed face under the peaked cap, the smile controlled, the eyes tired. While Germany glorified its aces, another story was unfolding thousands of feet above the Atlantic shipping lanes. In factories across the United States, engineers were redesigning a British-built airframe. The North American P-51 had begun as a project for the RAF, but it was the marriage with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that transformed it. At 30,000 feet, the Merlin-powered Mustang could match any German fighter and outlast them all. Its range exceeded 1,600 kilometers with drop tanks, enough to escort bombers from English bases to Berlin and back. Pilots from the 354th Fighter Group tested it in late 1943. They quickly realized what they had. The P-51 climbed like a 109, dove like a 190, cruised at 440 miles per hour. It could loiter, fight, and run home. It was the escort the bomber crews had begged for since the beginning of the campaign. By early 1944, the first Mustang groups joined the long bomber streams. For the men in the B-17s, the sight of those sleek silver fighters curving overhead was deliverance. For the Luftwaffe, it was the beginning of the end. Late February 1944 brought one raid after another. Mayer's group rose again and again to intercept. Losses mounted, not only among the bombers, but among German fighters. The escorts no longer turned back at the Rhine. They followed, pursued, attacked. They appeared high where none had been before. On February 21st, Mayer led an interception near the French coast. The formation was met not by helpless bombers, but by waves of fighters that refused to disengage. His pilots returned shaken, some missing. The old certainty was slipping away. In his combat report, he noted new types, high altitude, aggressive. He still believed tactics could compensate. He drilled his units, adjusted climb angles, refined a frontal attack to account for escorts. But the numbers spoke plainly. Allied production overwhelmed attrition. Each lost Mustang was replaced in days. Each German ace lost took months to train. On March 2nd, weather broke clear over France. Intelligence reported another large bomber formation crossing the channel toward targets in the Meuse region. Mayer ordered readiness at once. He climbed at 9:20 hours with his staff flight for aircraft from Stab JG-2. Altitude, 22,000 feet. Radio chatter reported contact with B-17s near Sedan. He led his formation into position for a head-on pass. Above, invisible against the sun, were elements of the U.S. 56 Fighter Group, P-47 Thunderbolts providing cover. Mayer began his dive, lined up the lead bombers. Tracer streams crossed the sky. A second later, his world exploded in light. A Thunderbolt pilot, likely from the 56th, saw the diving FW-190s and rolled him behind. Mayer's aircraft took hits through the nose and cockpit. Witnesses below saw smoke, then a steep roll, then nothing. The Focke-Wulf hit the ground near Montmedy. No parachute opened. Mayer was 26. For the Luftwaffe, his death was one more line in a growing list of irreplaceable names. Galland sidelined, Marseille dead. Now it needs soon to fall. In the weeks after, the Mustang became a constant presence. Bomber losses dropped. German fighters dwindled. The P-51's arrival marked the irreversible loss of air superiority. It was not only its performance, but what it represented, the full weight of American industry and logistics reaching maturity. Within 6 months, the Allies owned the daylight sky. Luftwaffe units were forced to disperse, fly from hidden strips, attack only in desperation. Meyer's JG-2 continued under new command, but the legend of its fallen Commodore became both pride and omen. Egon Meyer's career spanned the rise and fall of German air dominance in the West. He fought from the first conquest to the edge of ruin, witnessing both the triumph of tactics and their futility against overwhelming power. His innovations in bomber interception lived on, studied even by his enemies after the war. Yet his death also symbolized the collapse of a doctrine built on short wars and elite pilots. The Mustang and the men who flew it proved that endurance, organization, and mass production could achieve what individual brilliance could not. When historians speak of the turning point in the air war, they often mention March 1944, the month of Big Week and the sudden drop in German victories. It was the month Egon Mayer fell. High over the fields of France, contrails once twisted like white scars. Now the skies are quiet. The machines are gone, the fields have healed. But in the thin air above Montmedy, history still whispers of a man who believed he owned the sky, and of the new wings that proved him wrong. He mocked the Mustang. He never saw it coming. And when it came, the age of the Luftwaffe's hunters ended forever. The spring of 1944 brought a new rhythm to the war, a constant hum over the channel that no longer belonged to Germany. To the men of the U.S. 8th Air Force, it was the sound of confidence. To the Luftwaffe, it was the sound of exhaustion. Before the Mustang, every bombing mission had carried a shadow of dread. The great silver fortresses could take off from England and climb toward Germany, but their escorts, the P-47s and P-38s, could only protect them part of the way. Somewhere over Belgium or Holland, the fighters would turn back, and the bombers were left to face the Luftwaffe alone. Crews called it flying the death zone. By the time they reached targets like Regensburg or Schweinfurt, German fighters were waiting, dozens at first, then hundreds, rising from every airfield. Many bomber crews never saw England again. But when the P-51 entered the war, the death zone began to shrink. Its drop tanks gave it the reach to stay with the bombers to the target and back. Its speed and altitude matched the Luftwaffe's best, and its endurance, nearly 7 hours in the air, changed everything. Now, instead of turning for home, the escort stayed. They covered the formation during the bomb run, and when German fighters appeared, they pounced. The hunters became the hunted. Through March and April 1944, the air above Europe became a continuous battlefield. Entire German airfields were stalked by Mustangs waiting for takeoffs. Trains, trucks, even bicyclists became targets. For the first time, the Luftwaffe was fighting not only over Germany's enemies, but over Germany itself. The Americans called it the oil plan. Their strategy was simple: destroy the Luftwaffe by strangling its fuel, factories, and will to fight. And the Mustang was the scalpel to make it happen. Each dawn, hundreds of P-51s took off from England, their Merlin engines singing a deep, confident note. They joined bombers over the channel and climbed toward the blue above 30,000 feet, where the contrails spread into endless white rivers. The men inside these aircraft were young, barely out of school, but they were flying the most advanced piston fighter of its age. To sit inside a P-51 was to experience the height of wartime engineering. The cockpit was narrow, wrapped around the pilot like armor. Ahead stretched a long nose ending in the four-bladed propeller, driven by the 1,500 horsepower Merlin engine. Its 6.50 caliber Browning guns could shred anything they touched. Unlike earlier American fighters, the Mustang felt light, balanced. Its laminar flow wings sliced through the air with less drag than anything else of its time. It could cruise fast, turn tight, and dive like a hawk. It was both elegant and deadly, the rare machine that seemed to understand its purpose. For bomber crews, its presence was salvation. To see those distant silver specks above the formation meant someone was watching, ready to drop down like angels of aluminum. For the first time, the phrase, "we've got cover all the way," meant what it said. But Germany would not surrender its skies easily. Even after Meyer's death, Jägerschwader II and units like JG-26 Schlageter continued to rise, fighting desperately to repel the endless raids. In April 1944, the Luftwaffe attempted to mass its remaining fighter strength for what it called defense of the Reich. Old hands returned to the front. New aircraft like the FW-190D-9 and Bf-109G-6 filled the ranks. But the odds were impossible. Fuel was scarce. Many pilots barely had 20 hours of flight time before combat. They were sent up in 2s and 3s against hundreds of Mustangs. Every flight was a gamble. Every sortie drained what little was left of experience. By summer, the once feared Jägerschwader were shadows, symbols of courage fighting a war already lost in the factories. On the ground in England, life in the American bases felt both routine and surreal. Rows of olive-drab Mustangs lined the runways, crews in leather jackets joking before missions, the smell of fuel and coffee mixing with the damp air. The 4th Fighter Group at Debden, the 357th at Leiston, the 352nd at Bodney. These units became legends. Their aces, men like George Preddy, Don Blakesley, and John C. Meyer, racked up scores once unthinkable. But each knew that victory came at a cost measured in friends' names carved into wooden crosses. The air war was relentless. No front line existed, only altitude. A man could take off under English rain and die under a German sun. And yet, day after day, they flew. By May 1944, the Luftwaffe's losses were catastrophic. Entire Gruppen had been wiped out. Training schools were raided. Fuel reserves shrank to weeks. For the first time, the German High Command admitted that air superiority was gone. That same month, Allied bombers began softening the coast of France for something larger, something the world had not yet seen. D-Day was coming. The Mustangs now ranged freely over Normandy, strafing rail lines and bridges, isolating the beaches before a single soldier set foot on them. When the invasion began on June 6, 1944, they were everywhere, clearing the skies, guarding the fleet, diving through clouds to strike convoys and strongpoints. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, barely appeared. A handful of desperate sorties were launched. Most ended before they reached the beaches. The age of the German ace had ended in smoke. For the Americans, air power was no longer just protection, it was domination. Factories, fuel depots, rail networks. Nothing in occupied Europe was safe. The concept of strategic paralysis, once theoretical, was now reality. The Mustang gave America not just a weapon, but a psychological edge. Its sleek silhouette became a symbol. Fast, modern, inevitable. To the bomber crews, it meant hope. To civilians on the ground, it meant the tide had turned. And to the young men who flew it, it was freedom. By late 1944, the war had entered its final, desperate phase. The Luftwaffe threw its last strength into Operation Bodenplatte, a surprise New Year's Day attack on Allied airfields. Hundreds of German fighters roared low over Belgium and the Netherlands. For a few minutes, the old power returned. Hangars burned, aircraft destroyed. But then the Mustangs rose. The counterattack was swift, merciless. Nearly half of the Luftwaffe's striking force was lost in a single day. It never recovered. From then until war's end, the skies belonged to the Allies. As Germany collapsed, the men who once ruled its skies faced the end of their world. Many aces were dead. Others, like Adolf Galland, watched helplessly as young pilots went to their deaths. They had fought for a regime that promised invincibility and delivered ruin. Egon Meyer's name lingered in squadron messes, spoken with reverence and sadness. To some, he was the symbol of skill and honor in a dishonored cause. To others, he was simply a man caught between courage and futility. The Mustang had not killed him personally. History had. When the war ended in May 1945, thousands of aircraft sat silent on abandoned airfields. The Mustangs would soon return home or serve in new conflicts. The Luftwaffe ceased to exist. Europe lay in ruins, cities shattered, skies empty. But the legacy of that air war remained. From 1942 to 1945, more than 120,000 aircraft were lost in the European theater alone. Millions of tons of bombs fell. Entire nations were reshaped by the outcome of that struggle above the clouds. And within that story, amid the thunder and contrails, were two men who never met. Egon Meyer, the German tactician who defined the defense of the Reich, and the American Mustang pilots who unknowingly brought his era to an end. Their encounter lasted only minutes, but it represented years of evolution, of design, production, and strategy. One man embodied the past, the other, the future. Looking back now, the story of Egon Meyer and the P-51 Mustang is not one of villains and heroes, but of transformation. It is the moment when air war crossed a threshold, from the romantic duels of the early war to the industrial, relentless machinery of the modern age. Meyer's precision and bravery could not stand against the massed will of an industrial democracy. The Mustang, more than any other aircraft, symbolized that will. Its smooth metal wings carried not just guns, but the idea that numbers, logistics, and endurance could conquer even the most brilliant individual. That the machine of democracy, imperfect, immense, unstoppable, would always outlast the tyranny of a few. And so the story closes not with the roar of engines, but with silence. A French farmer, years later, plowing the same field near Montmedy, uncovered a piece of aluminum twisted and scorched. He didn't know whose plane it had been, but the historians who came later did. They said it was Meyer's. They placed it in a small museum nearby, a fragment of history, quiet and gray. Next to it hung a photograph of a P-51 Mustang. Two artifacts, once enemies, now side by side. Tom had made peace where men could not. The contrails have long faded. The engines are silent, but their echoes remain in the clouds of memory, in the diaries of pilots, in the bullet holes still visible in old hangar walls, in the rusting fragments scattered across European fields. Egon Meyer believed mastery of the sky was eternal. The Mustang proved that nothing in war ever is. When history remembers the air war over Europe, it tells of machines and men, of innovation and exhaustion. And somewhere above the clouds, the spirits of both the hunter and the hunted still circle, not in anger, but in remembrance. Because in the end, they were all chasing the same thing, a horizon that was always just out of reach.